Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives on Sustainable Development, Episode 5. I am your host again, Chris Whitehead, and today we are talking about a topic that I spend a lot of my time on, solid waste management. It's not the sexiest of topics, but frankly, it's absolutely a crucial one for many, many reasons. And my work through the years, as most of you know, technically has been air quality based, working for industrial sites, large and small, around the country. And as we've done various projects, we've witnessed a distrust, frankly, between communities and industry in a lot of instances. I don't want to speak for anyone, and I would never try to, but there's the disjoint there. And when you see kind of behind the curtain of the people who try to run these sites as best as they can and the effort and the intellect that they put into it, I think that's valuable to get the unbiased perspective. So I know as we put this episode out and speak to our two guests today, some might be upset by this, some might not. Everyone's going to find it informative, though, if you listen and are willing to learn more about the topics and the challenges that are faced by this industry, and also the rising challenges associated with climate change. And we're also going to get into, frankly, why historically a lot of these sites, whether it's landfills, whether it's waste to energy, scrap metal, whatever the exact type is, why historically they've been cited in certain areas, and the thinking that goes behind that. And also something that a lot of people don't understand, the amount of time and financial commitment that goes into building these types of projects. So I think it's valuable to put that type of information out there and let everyone do with it as they will and treat everyone as adults and definitely with respect. So with that, I'm not gonna go too much further, but I wanted to start off with some basic stats today that I actually looked up that I think do a good job of laying the groundwork. I'm gonna give fair warning here too that both of my kids are home from school today, so there's a good chance at any point a child will be peeking over my shoulders here. So we'll see how that goes. But in 2018, the United States processed roughly 292 million tons of municipal solid waste, better known as garbage to most of us. That equates to roughly 4.9 pounds per person every day. And it's an increase of about 93% from what this country was putting out in 1980. So a huge growth in just a small amount of time. Of that amount, roughly 69 million tons were recycled and 25 and about 25 million tons, or just under 8%, was composted. And unfortunately, a lot of those percentages are still about the same today, now 7 years later or so. And also in 2021, the United States recycled 58.6 million tons of iron, steel, and other various metals. So interesting stats. And to learn more about all of that and to hear from our guests today, I'd like to invite Andrew Cooley from EMR and Jyoti Agarwal from Reworld to come on video and camera, please. Afternoon, how are you?
Doing well.
Thank you guys for jumping on this afternoon.
Yeah,
Of
we're all
course.
glad to be here.
Pleasure.
Jyoti, if you want to start, just give us a little bit of background on yourself and why you decided to get into solid waste.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And like I said earlier, I'm very excited. This is my first podcast. So thank you for having me. Um, my background is that of an environmental scientist. First was very impressed with pollution microbiology when I was pursuing my master's at NJIT. And during that time, my mom and we would have a lot of kitchen table conversations because she was a chemist at wastewater treatment plant in Lyndon Roselle Wastewater Treatment Works. And we talk often about, the impact of measurement and science in ensuring the quality of water that gets released from these operations. And so that was interesting. And then I went on to work as a biological intern, aka wanted to be a park ranger, and I worked on the beaches of Queens, New York, to save the piping plover. That grant ended because there was budget cuts at the time. And so then I ended up working in corporate America, working for a coatings manufacturer, and firsthand got to see what environmental compliance looks like and what the adverse effects can be if we don't plan operations well. So that was very insightful. But that wasn't enough for me. So I wanted to go back to school. I went back to Rutgers University and got my doctorate in environmental sciences. And I had a really cool project. I worked on a NASA grant, which asked us to explore bioregenerative technologies to support long-term manned missions, right, to Mars. So you can't carry all your food with you, it's just too heavy. But what if we were to grow it? And if we were to grow it, then there's going to be waste. And how are you going to process that waste? So my portion was a very small part of it, but that was like an introduction to systems-wide thinking and waste in general. So I worked on that and learned a lot. I took 4 years off to raise my kids, and we travel every year to see the grandparents in India. And I noticed during these trips that there were these landfills that were showing up on the landscape, which was never there while I was growing up in India. And to me, they looked like a new mountain range. And it was just amazing as you zoned in, you saw, small animals on there. There were people there picking rags out, and there was smoke coming out of the small fires on these landfills. So that had a huge impact. And fast forward to today, after getting a lot of almost 18 years of experience in the environmental consulting world, I'm working today for Reworld, that actually focuses on providing alternatives to landfills. So taking your waste, finding new ways to use it, whether it's material reuse, whether it's energy recovery, that's what we do. And I've been here 8 years working, validating their sustainability messaging, developing it, creating it, working with the communities. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Jyoti. Andrew?
Yeah, so I started in the industry about 17 or 18 years ago now, primarily in a finance role, and have done mergers and acquisitions and strategy for large Fortune 500 company, and now for EMR, whom I work for, which is a large privately held recycler. We're based in the UK, but have about half of our global operations here in the States. So my exposure to the sustainability world was really came from the EU when they began to establish some common regulations and some standards for sustainability reporting. We needed as a company to get accounting quality data out to government officials in the EU and UK. And so from a US perspective, that's what I've been doing a lot of over the last several years. So I come in from not necessarily from an environmental standpoint, but from a finance perspective. So I've done a lot of different things for EMR. Certainly I've run facilities. I've been the CFO of a business unit, and now currently run a strategy for the US, which includes all of our sustainability work. So we are like I said, a global company, about 130 locations worldwide. And we recycle about 10 million tons of metal and plastics per year. So we like to say we're not in the solid waste business, we're in the avoiding solid waste business. So we do that. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think both of you come from an interesting perspective because you've been doing this a while, various tasks and jobs in each industry, as you were saying, but both of you have been directly involved with opening sites around the country, and I'm going to guess now also around the world. I alluded before when we first started chatting about the volumes that get processed in this country every year. Can you speak a little bit about that as a challenge, the associated environmental impacts of that, and then also how, or perhaps better said, what goes into the thinking and the mindset for potentially opening up a new site? And Jyoti or Andrew, whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I hear most when I talk about our industry, the recycled materials industry, is the first comment I get is people will say, "I didn't even know that existed." And what you begin to find as you dig one layer below the surface in our business is everything from roads and bridges to hospitals and ventilators to cell phones. Everything uses recycled materials. It's pervasive. So for us, it's a lot of education about just the basics of what we see and do every day uses recycled materials. So the function we perform within the economy in the U.S. and certainly globally is we're really providers of raw materials to the manufacturing industry. We take end-of-life goods, cars and washers and dryers and refrigerators and you name it, anything that has metal in it, we're able to recycle. And a lot of times those are very complex things. Think about it, an automotive recycling or car recycling is you start to see how many different grades of metals and plastics and glass and rubber. Those are very complex things to recycle. And so we invest heavily in technology. Technology is huge in this industry because we're really every day trying to avoid sending material into landfills or into solid waste. We really are passionate about finding as much recyclable material as we possibly can in order to provide to our customers to make new products. So for us, a lot of times when we go into new sites or talk with new stakeholders, it's really just getting them up to speed on this is a really key part of our day-to-day life. And you may not see it and it may not be, incredibly sexy, but the reality is we all rely on it every single day. So we're passionate about what we do. And I think our passion comes through when we talk with our communities that we work in.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. And Jyoti, I know one of the things he said is something you guys have in common, a passion for waste reduction, just from speaking to both of you. I'll obviously give you a chance to answer the same questions, but perhaps if you want to focus too on what goes into the potential thinking and investment for building a new site.
Yeah, so on the Reworld side, our portfolio is quite diverse. We recently rebranded. This week is like the first year anniversary of our rebrand. We used to be Covanta, but our entire portfolio has changed. We still continue to have energy recovery facilities, and we're growing with more material processing facilities as well. And both are quite different. And, some of the history behind the way energy recovery facilities have been viewed in the past is a very relevant perspective, in the sense that waste processing classically, or traditionally rather, have been placed in low-income communities and communities of color, right? This is not a fact that we can avoid. We have to face that. It's, many of the sites that we operate today were placed in operation in collaboration with government partnerships, and but a lot of them we take ownership of, and we continue to operate them, and we are responsible for operating that facility in the safest and the lowest environmental impact that we can have. So we are very sensitive to that. And one of the things that we are facing today in terms of growing and having new facilities in place is the policy, the absence of policy and framework in terms of allowing, or actually not allowing, but recognizing the need for sustainable waste solutions. There's an absence of a cohesive policy at the national level. And, Andrew, you mentioned that you come from EU exposure, and the European Union has, kind of laid the path for us already. They put a landfill tax back in 2016, and today they are reaping the benefits of that policy and that tax framework that they put in place, where they are situated to start cultivating a circular economy. We in the United States are very far behind because of the absence of the role that policy plays. And we continue to landfill 64% of the waste that we are generating. You contrast that to a leading country like Germany or Denmark, their landfilling is down to 1%, with non-recyclables being managed through energy recovery operations, and a big portion of it going towards recycling. So there's a big role here for policy to play in which direction a nation can go or a region can go from a waste management perspective.
No, that's all really interesting, but it also makes me think again of the stats I started going through when we first started chatting here on the volumes that are processed each year and the steep trajectory since, as I said, 1980 or 1983. Do you guys also see the type of forecasting for the next 5, 10 years, whatever, that the volumes that you're going to need to process or that our country will need to process are likely still going up? And does that put various pressures on doing your business in the most environmentally friendly way?
Well, it's an interesting way to frame that question. I think for us, we export a lot of material out of the United States right now. The U.S. is what's called a net scrap exporter, meaning we have more recycled materials than we can utilize within the U.S. Trade policy over decades has developed to where, there's a real incentive for us to work with other countries, other global economies to provide raw materials to them, to the world, really. So the U.S. being such a developed economy, we have these, end-of-life products. We're a very consumer-oriented society, obviously, and so we go through our products, right? And those products come to their end of life fairly quickly as compared to other countries globally. So we're quicker to recycle and obviously have a much larger economy than almost anyone globally. So we have this massive engine of recycling already developed here in the U.S. And so to your question about, do we see it growing or not? It depends a lot on how the world grows, is how recycling grows. If there's a pull from international consumers to make more new products, then absolutely there's a pull within our industry to where the value of the material increases. And as values of material increases, there's a more and more economic incentive for everyone to recycle. So what Jyoti was talking about, she's exactly right, of course, is there's these landfill regulation in other countries have figured out if we make it economically expensive to throw things away, you get virtuous activity, you get more recycling. The U.S. has not done that by and large, right? You have some state and some local zoning that create that environment, but by and large, it's still cheap to throw things in a landfill in the U.S. as compared to other countries. And so what that does is that provides basically an economic disincentive to recycle. So for us, we look at it and say, well, we would love for more people to recycle more material because that's the engine that we run on is more material coming through each one of our facilities. So in the most simple terms, as the economies grow, there's more demand for our product. That's probably the simplest way to say. So as we go through global recessions and even domestic slowdowns, that hurts our business because the pricing is an incentive for people to recycle.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Jyoti, anything on that to follow up?
Yeah, I would say, coming from municipal solid waste perspective, contrasted with commercial and maybe industrial waste, I think the scenes are a little bit different, right? Quite drastically different. Municipal solid waste, when you talk about recycling, it's still lagging. Back in 2018, when China said, we're not going to take your recyclables anymore, we struggled as a country, and we continue to struggle on that commodity recycling type of items because we didn't invest as much in our recycling infrastructure for municipal solid waste. The incentives to increase the amount of recyclables in materials, having markets that will then respond to recyclable products for those types of materials is still strongly lacking. And if you drive that problem upstream to our curbs, which is where we throw and segregate, or supposed to throw and segregate our waste, it comes down to each one of us. So human behavior and habits has a big role to play. But say you are separating out your waste. If there is no place for that material to be recycled, then it ends up going to a landfill. So both these need to go hand in hand when it comes to municipal solid waste. On the commercial side and on the industrial side, I think the opportunities for recycling are much larger because the quantity of waste is larger. It's likely more segregated. The needs are different. The private sector can go a lot faster with invention and technology to find alternatives. The whole concept of circular economies, when you talk about the concept of remanufacturing, right, with higher recyclable content, that can take a life of its own at the commercial and industrial waste types. But it's a very different problem at the community level for solid waste, municipal solid waste.
Yeah, I agree. Can you both speak a little bit about solid waste and how things like climate impacts or environmental impacts or economic and social come into your thinking and come into pricing models? And actually, perhaps said another way, at this point, is all of that actually incorporated or is there still room there?
So I can start with that because when we look at municipal solid waste, one of the biggest issues with landfilling municipal solid waste is landfills are the third largest generator of methane gas from a climate perspective, right? And methane is 80 times more potent if you look at the 20-year global warming potential. That's another conversation to have. Most of our accounting looks only at the 100-year global warming potential. However, methane lives in the atmosphere for a very short time period, and it imparts that warming potential in that short period. So when you use a longer factor to account for the impacts that methane has, your math is going to be off, and it's not going to account for the stronger impacts now. However, on a global level, I think a lot of institutions have recognized this issue around the increase of methane in the atmosphere. So, by diverting organics from our municipal waste, that is step one towards really reducing the greenhouse gases that come out of a landfill. Now, people talk about well, we can put better controls on landfills and we can extract more methane out of it, and then we can use that for energy recovery. So those are conversations that, in my opinion, my professional opinion, are not going to take us where we need to go. One, because if you look at more recent reports, landfills actually emit anywhere 2 to 3 times more methane than they actually report. Okay, so right there, you've got an issue of we don't even know exactly how much. We haven't known for some time how much methane is coming out. If you can't know how much you've been putting out, how can we trust the numbers around how much energy you're generating, how much you're capturing, and how much you're controlling, right? So that is one big issue around landfills and municipal solid waste from a climate perspective, which is why diversion of waste, diversion of organics from landfills becomes critical.
Yeah, no, she's hitting on. I think when Jyoti's talking about the amount of methane that's being emitted from these facilities, I think it speaks to a really important point, and that is it's the industrial users, the consolidators of material like landfills, or for us, we're a consolidator of material from the public all the way through industrial scrap materials. So it's the focus when you start talking about making changes, it really does need to be at this industrial level, right? That's where sort of the action is when it comes to emissions and those kinds of things. So whereas the public is incredibly important from their day-to-day behavior and their really support of the larger improved sustainability standards, it's really the companies and the organizations that are responsible for the collection and the storage, or in our case, sort of the recycling or disposal of material, where you really start to see you can make some big improvement in emissions and those kinds of things. So I think I'll give you an example. I'll give you a number. So of the materials that we recycle, the vast majority come from not from individuals, but from industry, right? So end of life product is a huge part of it. So it's the collection. Up to 70% of all metals recycled, by way of example, come from industrial sources, right? They don't come from individuals. So you're really talking about, in our space, the focus really needs to be on these larger companies, these larger organizations. And so whereas the public plays a role, it's really the levers really are at the corporate level.
I want to save that question for a little later that I want to ask you both about EPR, but Andrew touched on this a little bit. We've been speaking up to this point about climate impacts and climate warming emissions, but then also, of course, you have localized contaminants, things you build for, things you expect to some extent. The criteria contaminants, NOx, SOx, particulate matter, and the controls you put in place are done so knowing or having a good idea as to the type of waste stream that you're going to expect. But it's not homogeneous. So can you speak for a little bit about the various safeguards you might have in place or checks you might have in place to know what's going through your processes at the start?
Yeah, I mean, I think on our side, with our what are called now thermomechanical treatment facilities, rest of the world calls them waste to energy facilities, and our leadership felt that we were missing a very key component of that facility, which was metal recovery, by simply labeling those facilities waste to energy. So we call them thermomechanical treatment facilities because there's a thermal component of combustion and then there's the mechanical component of metal recovery. These facilities are essentially power plants. And instead of burning fossil fuel, coal, oil, what have you, or natural gas. We are burning waste. And that is what's producing steam, which runs turbines and generates electricity, which then actually is put on the grid. Now, the electricity that we produce, we use some of it to run the facility itself. So it's self-serving. We call it a parasitic load because we're using our own energy that we've generated. But the balance goes on to the grid for consumption. And as you can imagine, like any other power plant, we have emissions. We are also a very heavily regulated industry for that reason, for the amount of emissions that we put out into the airshed. But we also are very proud to operate anywhere from 45% to 98% below our permitted standards. So essentially, our permits say that for X pollutant, for SOx or NOx or carbon monoxide, you can only emit a certain concentration into the atmosphere for X amount of time. So, and I'll give you an example. For carbon monoxide, it would be no more than 100 parts per million for a 4-hour block of time that we're operating. So our opacity, meaning visible emissions, is no more than 6% for a 10-minute period. So extremely stringent permit requirements. And we operate well below those permitted standards. These are federal standards that come from the MACT regulation, the Maximum Achievable Control Technology regulations for large municipal solid waste combustors. And we do that. Think of that permit as a permit to pollute, right? That's essentially what it is. But we operate well below those limits because we can. And that's kind of what we call our performance gains. And we like to keep those year on year. And we want to improve our performance in terms of what controls we put in place. So for particulate matters, we have these massive bag houses that work like a vacuum cleaner, right? So, the air is coming into the bag house and then filtered air is going out of the stack. We also have what's called lime slurries. So it's alkaline or basic in nature. So that interacts with acid gases that are coming out of the boiler and neutralizes the fly ash and the gases that come out of it. And that too passes through the bag house. So now you are neutralizing the acid gases and you're removing the fly ash before the air can be emitted into the atmosphere. We also have NOx control. NOx is nitrous oxide compounds, which are going to be created anytime you combust any kind of material. It's just the nature of combustion. Even your bonfire, when you have in your backyard, is producing NOx. So we are required to operate our facilities with all of the air pollution control equipment. Without that, we have to shut down. And so those are some of the examples of the higher, polluting, if you will, assets that we have to operate with controls in place.
And Jyoti, just to the point too about knowing what's going to be in the waste stream before it goes into the incinerator?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So when it's municipal solid waste, it's whatever you and I are throwing out, but we are required to inspect 10% of the loads that come into our facility. So clearly, a lot of the waste that we throw out comes in plastic bags. It could be black bags, white bags. You can't see what's in them, but in the process of handling it, you're able to inspect. It's somebody's job to go out on the floor and look for items that are not supposed to go into our facility. White goods, or even large tree stumps, or a big concrete block, any of those items, we want to remove that before it goes into our feed chute, because these are highly engineered boilers. We're talking about something that is, imagine a 5-story building and with elevators that help you go up. So these are not small operations. It's not like your grandfather's incinerator from, back in the 70s. So the inspection process is also very tight. We also have, even before the material arrives at our facility, we have what's called waste profiling. So we have to put checks on, this is primarily for commercial customers that we have. We review the nature of the properties of their waste, chemically, physically, and we check that against our permit to make sure that we're not taking in something we're not allowed to. And we actually have teams of people that do this across all of our operations. And then once that's approved, the load comes into the facility, it gets inspected before it goes right into the tipping floor or in the pit.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, so if Reworld are otherwise energy plants, EMR facilities are urban mines. So what we're doing is we're going in and we're pulling out material that can be reintroduced into the supply chains globally. And so for us, what we've seen around emissions is when you start putting emissions equipment on production units, it also requires energy. So it's not a free game, right? It's like the best example is probably everyone understands is electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles have a very low emissions footprint, but you're charging them with energy, right? Electricity from potentially coal-powered coal fire plants where your energy or electricity is coming from them. So there's an energy footprint associated with even electric cars. It's the same thing with emissions equipment. So for us, whereas we may have emissions equipment on our mega shredders, part of the challenge is we're using a significant amount of natural gas or electricity in order to do it. So it doesn't come free. So there is a challenge when you start looking at air emissions, right? There's also sort of a trade-off a little bit. The trade-off is you may reduce scope 1 emissions by way of example, but you increase scope 2 emissions, right? So we've noticed that in order to do things the right way, you have to strike that balance, right? And I think Jyoti was probably saying that as well in hers, is there's a point of no return where you're spending enormous amounts of energy in order to get a decreasing amount of improved air emissions out of your systems. You want to always be improving it, but there are some real limitations on economically and environmentally that stuff you just can't do. You do the absolute best you can, and we're committed to being excellent in everything that we do, and I know Reworld is as well. But there are some limitations technologically and from an energy perspective. So I wanted to put that in there as well. There's some challenges with that.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up on that real quick, that is exactly the kind of cost that gets wrapped up in what's called externalities, right? Why is sending a ton of waste to one of the thermomechanical treatment facilities more expensive than sending it to a landfill? Because we are taking within our ledger the price we pay to reduce that pollution that otherwise is not done on the landfill side. So why is it called an externality? Because it's external to my company's boundary. So I don't account for it. But the minute I start internalizing it, my cost goes up. So I can be paying, a customer may be paying $10, $15, depending upon where you are in the country, or $30 a ton to send waste to a landfill. Whereas coming to a TTF, it may be double or a little more than double. But that's the price. To Andrew's point, it's not free. It's about responsible waste management, right? Do we want to leave a problem for our future generations, or do we want to take care of the waste that we generated today and be done with it?
Yeah. And one other thing I think to add on as well, the industry we operate in, the recycled materials industry, is a commodities industry. So the fluctuation in plastics prices, metal prices, energy prices, all reflect, have an impact on what you can actually recycle, right? I mean, I think the stories have been well documented over the years of how much curbside recycling is actually getting recycled. Well, it actually depends a little bit on commodity prices, right? If you have really a poor demand for certain grades of plastics within the global economy, that's going to make it harder and harder economically to recycle things. Same thing with any type of metal as well, is the lower the price gets on any of those materials, our inputs or our products that we do, the harder it is to sort of move it through the most environmentally excellent systems that you have, right? Is because it just gets prohibitively expensive to do it. So there's this constant challenge, balance, trade-off that you're playing when you have a global economy with global commodity prices and all sorts of different grades of material. So that's another sort of fly in the ointment a little bit when you're trying to do the right thing and it's economically difficult to do it.
And now I think it's time for the extended producer responsibility question. New technologies have posed a number of challenges. One that obviously comes to the forefront in my mind is lithium-ion batteries. And frankly, there's not a lot of good answers right now that I have witnessed or come across anyway for how to dispose of these things properly and the various risks that come associated with them. Do manufacturers, in your opinion, have to take a larger role as part of this process?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the answer is yes. And the reason why is they know what their products are, right? Once they come to our facilities, we're in a defensive mode, right? We're learning what's in those. We're learning how to what's embedded lithium-ion batteries, what's not. How do we identify that stuff? So there's the first piece is really about taking some responsibility of educating and equipping the people that actually end up seeing these products at their end of life. The challenge, I think, with EPR, particularly with lithium-ion batteries, is the lifespan of these products can be fairly long, right? So they design a product 12 or 15 years ago. It comes onto the market 8 or 10 years, right? And then it's disposed of. That's a long cycle, right? So we're asking them to say, well, you should design different products. Well, the design cycle is really long, right? So it's not just manufacturers, you're responsible for your own product. It is much more of a systems thinking. It's much more sort of a circularity concept of saying, how can they design their products to be much more recyclable, much more identifiable, much more sort of easy for us to remove the batteries so that it doesn't begin to pollute the waste stream or the recycling stream and make it a waste stream.
No, that's very well said, Andrew. If you remember, there was a program that the EPA had, which was called Design for the Environment, DFE with a lowercase f. And that went away very fast. And what was interesting about that program was to take into consideration these kinds of items of, what happens at the end of life. Now, with product declarations of, carbon product declarations and carbon footprints that, certain products are required to put out, will capture that information. But you're absolutely right. If we're going to apply a redesign of how we manufacture items that are going to come into the market, I think the waste sector needs a seat at the table and should be looped in to be able to contribute to that so that we can explain what are the real consequences of that item not being, of us not knowing what's in it, right? What are the hazards of that? There's worker safety issues, there's equipment issues, which is there's a lot of investment in these operations. So it costs the manufacturer, not to mention the environmental impacts. And if there's accidental emergency issues that occur, then that's an added cost to the operation, to the community. So, manufacturers may be just focusing on design, development, distribution, and that's it as part of their linear economy piece, and leaving out the end of life piece. And that just is something that needs to be revisited. You're absolutely right. I like how you said it. You need to have that systems wide thinking of what is my widget doing in reality.
And I promise I will listen to the first part of that when I get
You
back.
didn't miss much.
We're starting to come up on time a little bit, but I don't want to not address one more area. Both of your companies and both of you have understood at various levels the importance of stakeholder engagement and developed policies and programs over a number of years. I guess how I'm going to ask this is how did it start and how's it going right now?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. For us, I think we've always been a solid member of our communities, but I don't know that we've always been proactive about being a solid member of our communities. I think we employ a lot of people and do a lot of amazing work from a recycling perspective and from a superior way to provide a sustainable supply chain to manufacturing in the world. But I think what we've shifted and what we've seen over the last few years, particularly in Camden, New Jersey, is really proactively going out and having a force in the community where we're asking the questions of our community about what's important. What are the goals of our community? Where is our community going? And then getting EMR aligned with those goals rather than sort of assuming we know or just being a good neighbor. I think what we've learned is we actually have an opportunity to support, align with our internal efforts as an organization with our communities, right? But that takes a lot of trust on both ends. It doesn't just sort of, oh, one day I want to decide to go into a community meeting and talk. It's not like that. It's much more about understanding the culture and the heartbeat and sort of the movement of how different local economies work and who the players are and who the influencers are, and really aligning our sustainability and our business model with the community. It's not enough to want to do the right thing or even donating to what we might think the right thing. It's much more powerful to know the stories of the community, right? To understand sort of how it moves. So for us, what we've learned over the last few years is really how do you begin to contribute to where the community wants to go and listening to that closely. And we've learned a lot. I mean, it's just, you got to sort of we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And for us, we've really seen the value of really listening again, and really being committed to that, to understand it. So yeah, it's volunteering. Yes, it's donating, it's sponsoring events, it's hosting things. Of course, it's all those things, but it's really more about understanding and being committed to really understanding what's happening in a local community. That's really yielded the best returns for us.
Yeah, I'll say, at Reworld, we're extremely proud of the community partnerships that we have built. We go as far back as 2011 with our first community partnership with community leaders in Chester, Pennsylvania, where our Delaware Valley TTF is located. And it's in a host of industrial facilities. There's a refinery there, there's a paper mill and other manufacturing facilities. But we started that partnership for the reason, another way of kind of maybe saying what Andrew was saying is meeting the community where they're at, right? Because yes, as a corporation, you have your agenda, you have your strategy, and you have your numbers that you need to meet. And often, as we've seen in waste processing, in the waste sector, these communities may not even have the capacity to come to the table with you with an informed set of parameters. And Chris, we learned this in our first sustainability conference in Camden when we had that one gentleman get up and say, you helped me build that capacity. Bring me to the point where I can understand what you are saying to me. So, really meeting them, understanding that often these communities, they can be, food deserts. There may not be, and Camden is that example, right? There is no grocery store in Camden. So there are some very real challenges that these communities face. And as an operation in that community, you want to be a good neighbor. So what does a good neighbor do? You take meaningful actions. Are you in a place to prioritize their agenda, provide jobs? Are you okay? Are you ready to train them? Are you ready to, once they're trained, move them up in more responsible roles? And then, of course, doing all the other things that Andrew talked about in terms of volunteering and donations and sponsorship. And I also want to just reemphasize the concept of trust. And having trust between the parties is important, but we also have to remember that it's a two-way communication. You have to have all parties arrive with respect and with candor, have those honest, difficult conversations. But you start building that, and it takes time. Today happens to be the day our facility manager at our Camden location retired. And if there's anybody who can serve as an example of being a true steward of the environment and the community from a waste sector, I would say Todd Frace is one of those individuals. And in fact,
I call him now.
yes, yes.
I actually had no idea.
You didn't know?
I had no idea.
Yeah. And you can tell that, how much of an impact he had because the Camden community, asked him, would you reconsider? Are you sure you want to retire? Now that's, a legacy that is exemplary in terms of what change you've brought about through your work.
Absolutely. And frankly, I've attended a number of conferences with Todd, and he's like the mayor down there. So
Right.
it's always kind of impressive, honestly, to me. But I love that you also brought up the experience we both had with a community member in Camden a few years ago at our Rutgers event, because that was one of the experiences that drove me to start this podcast. So that's great. We're up against the time here a little bit, so I want to give you both an opportunity for some final thoughts, but also our largest demographic is actually younger people, people in college, grad school, university, interested in studying these topics. So if you can speak to them at all and give some final thoughts, what would you have to say?
Yeah, I'll start. So I get the opportunity at EMR to oversee what we call our Future Leaders program. And what this is this is an opportunity to bring people early in their career into the recycling industry. And we take our time to give them exposure to all the things that we do. And as we sort of built this program over the years, I've been fortunate to be able to interview dozens of these young people. And I would say every single one of them has always said, well, the reason I'm interested in EMR is I'm really interested in the sustainability portion of this business, every single one of them. So I'm really encouraged by this next generation that they're factoring into their careers and into their goals and really into their jobs this whole idea of sustainability. It's really exciting. And so I get questions all the time about, well, okay, so we're a metal recycler or a materials recycler. How does that fit with sustainability? How does that work? And so I get to sort of tell our story of how much we do, not just in volume of material and all that, but just the true nature of our business is really at its core is a sustainable business. I mean, We are at its core. So it's fun to be able to tell the story to the next generation, to invite them into our business, show them there's a tremendous number of opportunities to grow, both financially and from a promotion standpoint very quickly within our business. But you also get to do it under the guise of you're really working for a very sustainably driven business. So for me, it's exciting to kind of see that next generation come in and value it, and for us to be able to partner with them and give them opportunities to really grow professionally as well. So integrating their knowledge, almost every college we talk to now has a great program where they're talking about sustainability, they're talking about environmental awareness, they're talking about, and I think that's a net positive for the next generation of business. I really see that as a positive. So that sort of has been on my heart and my mind as we've been talking.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on that with, there are ample opportunities to be a problem solver in our world today. It's which problem do you want to solve? Take your pick. And once you have that, identify what it is what skill set do you have? Build that knowledge set. Remember that technical knowledge is important, but you are also going to be part of a team. You're going to be working with other people. So learning to be a team member, developing those soft skills, and, be listening to those that disagree with you so that you can open your mind to have more of a growth mindset. All these soft skills, hard skills, technical skills are going to help you grow. And the growing never stops, right? So you're always going to be learning. I lead a team of very young graduates. Basically, I think they're like maybe 2 years out of college. And it's been a lot of fun working with them because it really allows me to get some insight into what it takes for an individual to start their career. And some of those things, I'll say that the big ticket items are really that teamwork piece. They're technically all adept. They're engineers by training. They can go and get the work done. But working with people is tough, because it's not like a game where it's going to do exactly, the other person's going to do exactly what you want it to do, right? They're going to defer with you there. So learning, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we all as individuals need to sort of learn and overcome, and particularly for young professionals. Yeah. And, when you don't know something, don't think that, oh my gosh, I don't know enough. We are all learning. And so that whole question, Chris, that we had from that young lady at Rutgers about, I feel like such an imposter. I don't feel like I know enough. You just have to continue learning and have confidence and faith in yourself and know that there is no end to your learning. And there's reverse mentoring. That's a whole nother concept of youth. And my team teaches me all the time. So we're always learning. So I would just say that.
Well, I think that's a great spot to stop. And I know I learned something on this podcast, even after knowing you guys both for a few years now and knowing these topics pretty well. So I hope anyone listening also picked up a few things. And I think if you come into these conversations objectively and with an open mind, willing to listen to differing potentially perspectives, there's a good chance you will learn something. So thank you both. I enjoyed this. And for everyone listening, be sure to tune in next time when we have Mark Jacobson from Stanford University and Doug Hallisman from 1898 to talk about what's technically possible in renewables development and what potential bottlenecks are ahead there. So I'm looking forward to that. And as always, follow us on all podcast platforms. And thank you both very much.
Thank you, Chris.